June 12th, 1962, 7:15 in the morning. Cell Block B, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, on its rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay. A guard is walking the morning count past a row of cells when he stops at one where the inmate has not risen for breakfast. He calls the man's name.
Get up, Morris. It's moving day.
Nothing. He reaches through the bars and raps the sleeping figure on the head, and the head rolls off the pillow, bounces, and lands on the concrete floor. It is not a head. It is a painted sculpture of one, built from paper and plaster, wearing real human hair, staring up at the guard with painted eyes. The sirens begin. 2 more cells hold 2 more sleeping dummies. 3 inmates, Frank Morris and the brothers John and Clarence Anglin, are gone out of the most escape-proof prison ever built in America, through holes in the back of their cells that have been there, hidden in plain sight for months. By the time the count is finished, the men have at least a 9-hour head start, and somewhere out in the cold gray water or beyond it, the greatest mystery in the history of American prisons has already begun. Because from that morning to this one, no one has ever proven what happened to them. Not the FBI in 17 years of trying, not the United States Marshals in the decades since. Nobody. You have to understand what Alcatraz was, to understand the size of what those 3 dummies meant. The rock held about 250 men out of the roughly 25,000 in the federal system, the 1% considered too dangerous, too clever, or too escape-prone for anywhere else. Capone did time there. So did Whitey Bulger. In 29 years as a federal prison, 36 men had tried to get off the island in 14 separate attempts. 23 were caught. 6 were shot dead. 2 drowned. The score, as the Bureau of Prisons told it, was perfect. Nobody escapes from Alcatraz. And then 3 bank robbers with sharpened spoons and a broken vacuum cleaner beat the fortress so cleanly that the argument about whether they survived is still open, officially, today. This is the true story behind Escape from Alcatraz, the 1979 Don Siegel film that put Clint Eastwood in Frank Morris's cell, shot on the island itself. The movie is remarkably faithful to the record, and it ends where the record ends, at the waterline, in the dark. This is everything on both sides of that waterline. The engineering of the escape, step by documented step, the night itself, and then the evidence, all of it, the paddle and the wallet and the letter and the photograph from Brazil, laid out so you can judge the only question that matters. Did the water take them, or did they take the water? Start with the mind at the center of it. Frank Lee Morris was born in Washington, D.C. on September 1st, 1926, and the system had him almost from the beginning. Orphaned young, he was bounced through foster homes and picked up his first criminal conviction at 13. What the record establishes beyond argument is what he became. A career burglar and bank robber whose defining talent was not violence but analysis. A quiet, self-contained man whom prison testing scored with an IQ of 133 in the top range of the population, and whom officials described as borderline genius. And he applied that intelligence to exactly one recurring problem: walls. In 1955, he escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary while serving 10 years for bank robbery, and stayed out about a year before a burglary put him back inside. The federal system read his file, counted the escape attempts, and made the decision that created this entire story. They sent the escape artist to the escape-proof prison. Morris arrived on Alcatraz in January 1960. His cell was on B Block, and the government had, without knowing it, just delivered its best lockpick to its best lock. The muscle arrived within the year. John and Clarence Anglin were 2 of a large family of farm laborers from Donaldsonville, Georgia, brothers born a year apart around 1930, who had grown up picking crops up and down the country with their parents and, by their family's account, swimming in Lake Michigan in water cold enough to keep everyone else on the shore. Hold on to that detail, because their family certainly has. In January 1958, the brothers robbed the Bank of Columbia in Alabama, by family accounts carrying a toy pistol, and drew federal time. They could not stop trying doors. Repeated escape attempts at other institutions earned John a transfer to Alcatraz in October 1960, and Clarence followed in early 1961. And here the fortress made its one fatal administrative mistake. Morris and the Anglins, who knew each other from earlier stretches inside, ended up in adjoining cells. The fourth man in the block was Allen West, a career car thief on his second Alcatraz term, a talker who would become the plan's fourth conspirator and, in the end, its narrator. Because everything history knows about how this was done comes principally from West, the man who helped build it all and then watched the others vanish without him. Understand also what daily life on the rock was engineered to do, because the plan grew directly out of its one loophole. Alcatraz ran on routine as a weapon, counts up to 12 times a day. Work, meals, and lockup on a rhythm designed to make time itself the warden. Privileges were minimal and earned, and one of the few granted was music, instruments in cells during a set evening hour. The routine that was supposed to crush men's initiative became the escape's greatest asset, because a prison that runs on perfect repetition is also perfectly predictable. Morris did not have to guess where every guard would be at 9:40 each night. The institution had published its own schedule to him every day for 2 years. Now the plan itself, and it deserves the full breakdown, because this was not a prison break. This was an engineering project run inside a maximum security facility for 6 months without detection, and it worked in 5 documented steps. Step 1, the opportunity, and it was Alcatraz's own body failing. The prison had been built decades earlier, partly with salt water in the concrete, and half a century of bay air had been quietly eating it ever since. Around the small ventilation grills at the back of each cell, the concrete had gone soft. Behind those vents ran an unguarded utility corridor, a dark 3-story canyon of pipes serving the whole block. The fortress had a seam, and Morris found it. Step 2, the tools. Spoons stolen from the mess hall and sharpened. Discarded saw blades. And the masterpiece, an improvised power drill built from the motor of a broken vacuum cleaner. Step 3, the noise and the cover. The block had a nightly music hour, and Morris had an accordion. While he played, the digging ran under the sound. By day, the growing holes were hidden behind false grills and cardboard painted to match the cell walls, and the work continued for roughly 6 months, from late 1961 into the spring, with guards walking past the holes every single day. Step 4, the workshop in the sky. The top of the cell block, above the lights, was a dead space nobody watched, and West had even been assigned by guards to paint up there, unmonitored. The plotters turned it into a factory. Out of more than 50 raincoats, stolen and collected from the prison's own workshops, they cut and sealed a raft the Bureau later measured from West's account at 6 feet by 14, its seams stitched and vulcanized against the prison's hot steam pipes, plus homemade life vests, plywood paddles, and a concertina adapted as a bellows to inflate the raft. And in their cells, they built the 4 sleeping heads, paper and plaster sculpted and painted with flesh tones from prison art kits, finished with real hair swept from the barbershop floor. Step 5, the flaw. And it is the flaw in every plan and every story we tell. The schedule. 4 men had to be ready on the same night, and one of them was not. The night of June 11th, 1962. Lights out at 9:30. Morris and the Anglins tucked the dummy heads into their bunks, pulled away their false grills, and slipped through the back walls of their cells into the utility corridor. And in the 4th cell, Allen West met the cruelest irony on the rock. West had reinforced the crumbling concrete around his own grill with cement to keep his hole from being noticed, and the cement had hardened. His disguise had become his lock. While he clawed at it, the other 3 climbed 30 feet of pipes to the top of the block, gathered the raft and gear from the workshop, and forced their way through a ventilation shaft to the roof, where guards that night logged a loud crash from above and dismissed it. Across the rooftop in the dark, down roughly 4 stories of bakery, smokestack, piping, Past the guard towers, over the fences, down the embankment on the island's northeast shore near the power plant. And then, sometime after 10, into water that hovers around 50 degrees, in a bay famous for currents that move faster than a man can swim, aboard a raft made of raincoats. West finally broke free later that night, climbed all the way up, found the roof empty and the raft gone, and went back to his cell to wait for morning. When the head hit the floor at 7:15, he made his second consequential decision. He told the investigators everything, every step, every material, every intention, and in exchange became the one man in the plot who never faced the water and never faced a new charge. The plan he described had a destination, Angel Island, about 2 miles north, then across Raccoon Strait to the Marin shore, then a stolen car, stolen clothes, and gone. Pause on the choice of that night, because the record shows the clock forced it. The holes were ready, the gear was ready, but the men had learned that prison workers were scheduled to begin repairs on the crumbling block, the very decay the whole plan depended on. And West's account describes the group accelerating toward departure before the seam could be sealed. That pressure is likely what left West behind. His grill needed more work. The others could not wait, and the plan's iron rule asserted itself. The tide table does not negotiate. 3 men went because the window was closing, and the 4th man's misfortune preserved for history the only complete account of how it was all done. If West had squeezed out that night, we might know nothing, and there might be 4 ghosts in the bay instead of 3. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in the country's history, and the evidence it produced is the whole argument, so weigh each piece. 3 days after the escape, a plywood paddle was found floating near Angel Island. On June 21st, shreds of raincoat rubber turned up on Angel Island itself. Searchers recovered a homemade life vest and a second one outside the Golden Gate, and on one of them, investigators described teeth marks around the inflation valve, the signature of someone desperately blowing air into a failing float in open water. And then the strangest find. A rubber-wrapped packet, floating, containing photographs of the Anglin family and a list of names and addresses. The drowning camp reads that packet as a dead man's pocket torn open by the bay. The survival camp asks why men would carry their only contact list into the water unsealed against exactly this discovery, and whether a planted decoy is really beyond people this meticulous. On July 17th, the crew of a Norwegian freighter reported sighting a body in Denham floating roughly 20 miles beyond the Golden Gate. It was never recovered, never identified, and it remains the closest thing to a corpse this case has ever produced. The FBI worked every angle for 17 years, and its logic for the official conclusion was always less about bodies than about silence. No verified thefts of cars or clothes in Marin in the days after. No credible sightings, no arrests, ever, of 3 men who had spent their whole lives getting arrested. On December 31st, 1979, the Bureau closed its file, concluding the men most probably drowned, and handed the case to the United States Marshals Service. That same year, Eastwood's film reached theaters and made the 3 missing men immortal. The government closed the book, and Hollywood opened it in the same 12 months. But the case refused to die, because the other side of the ledger kept filling in. For years after the escape, the Anglin family in Georgia received unsigned Christmas cards that relatives insisted matched the brothers' handwriting. A fellow Alcatraz inmate, Clarence Carnes, claimed he received a postcard bearing the words, "Gone fishing," which he said was the agreed signal of success. At the brothers' mother's funeral, family lore describes 2 unusually tall strangers in women's dress standing apart from the mourners. None of that is proof, and all of it is family testimony. Then came the items you can actually look at. In 2015, the Anglin family produced a photograph they said was taken in Brazil in 1975, showing 2 middle-aged men standing by a roadside, and a facial recognition examiner hired for a television investigation concluded the men were more than likely John and Clarence. The marshals looked and were not persuaded. In 2018, The public learned that the San Francisco FBI had received a letter back in 2013 from a writer claiming to be John Anglin himself, aged 83 and sick with cancer, offering to surrender in exchange for medical care, and stating that Frank Morris had died in October 2005 and Clarence in 2011. The Bureau's laboratory ran the letter against the men's known handwriting and prints. The results came back inconclusive, and the offer was never pursued, and science took its own swing at the mystery. In 2014, researchers at Delft University in the Netherlands ran hydraulic models of the bay's currents on that exact night and found a narrow window. If the raft pushed off around 11:30, the tides could plausibly have carried it to Horseshoe Bay, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, with debris drifting back toward Angel Island, exactly where the paddle and the raincoat shreds were found. Leave earlier, and the current owned them, straight out the gate into the Pacific. The entire mystery, reduced to a departure time nobody will ever know. The consequences landed on everyone left behind. The escape humiliated the Bureau of Prisons, and combined with the rock's crumbling structure and operating costs, roughly triple those of other federal prisons, it sealed the institution's fate. Alcatraz closed on March 21st, 1963, 9 months after the escape. The three men, in a real sense, killed the prison on their way out. Alan West, the man the cement kept behind, was transferred on through the system and died in a Florida prison in December 1978, months before the movie made the escape immortal, having spent his remaining years as the plan's living witness and its most bitter footnote, and the file itself never closed. The Marshals Service maintains the case to this day under a standing policy: pursue each man until confirmed dead or until his 99th birthday. Frank Morris's file crossed that 99-year line in September of 2025. The Anglin's clocks are still running. One more ripple deserves the record. The escape rewrote how the federal system thought about its most determined prisoners. The Supermax doctrine that eventually produced facilities like Florence in Colorado, concrete boxes designed around the assumption that somewhere in the population is a Frank Morris studying the walls, descends in a straight line from the morning that head hit the floor on B Block. Every modern prison designer knows this case. It is the one they are all answering. So what does this story actually reveal? Strip away the mystery, and the 1962 escape is the cleanest demonstration on record of a truth every institution hates. There is no such thing as an escape-proof prison. There are only prisons whose weaknesses have not yet met the right mind. Alcatraz's reputation was built on water, and its failure was built into its own walls, in salt-softened concrete, an unguarded corridor, an unwatched rooftop, and a music hour. Morris and the Anglins did not beat the rock with force. They read it patiently for 6 months, the way Morris had read every wall of his life. Whether the bay finished what the fortress could not is a question the record honestly cannot answer, and after more than 60 years, that unanswered question has become the point. The government needs them drowned, because the alternative is that the impossible prison was beaten in full. The rest of us, if we are honest, have been rooting for the raft since 1962. Somewhere between those two needs, three men in the dark water remain exactly where they have always been, gone and not gone. The only inmates in American history who escaped even the ending of their own story. If this story hit you, subscribe. Every week we dig into a true crime story the movies only began to tell, and the truth is always heavier than the script. Drop a comment with your verdict. Did the bay take them, or did they make it?